Artificial Frontier Podcast.
Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're heading straight to Hollywood's golden age. But this time, it's not all about the glamour. We're diving into a story about Charlie Chaplin. You know, Charlie Chaplin, the guy with the bowler hat and cane. But this deep dive, we're looking at some declassified FBI files. And let me tell you, they reveal a totally different side to this cinematic legend. A side that's more, let's just say it's more drama than comedy.
Yeah, and the documents you've given us, they're from a 1943 FBI investigation, a White Slave Traffic Act case against Chaplin. Can you believe that? If FBI was looking into Chaplin, and, they really were going all out. They were digging into Chaplin's past, his relationships, even trying to get information from his staff. It's amazing to see how they built their case, and it really gives you a sense of, the anxieties of that time.
Wow, so there was more to Chaplin than just those on-screen antics, huh? Like real-life drama happening behind the scenes.
Oh, absolutely. And right at the center of it all is this young woman, Joan Barry. The FBI was looking into Chaplin's relationship with her, and they were leaving no stone unturned. Seriously. They were looking at their past encounters, their travels, even talking to Chaplin's former employees.
Hold on, White Slave Traffic Act, that sounds, pretty serious for a Hollywood romance, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, it does sound a bit dramatic now. But back then, this act, they called it the Mann Act. It was a big deal. It was meant to stop, the transportation of women across state lines for immoral purposes. And back then, that could be anything the authorities thought was inappropriate. You got to remember, this was the early 1900s. Society was a lot different norms.
I see. So a lot more gray area back then. So tell me about Joan Barry. Who was she, and what was her relationship with Chaplin actually like?
Well, Barry, she was trying to make it as an actress, aspiring actress. And looking at these FBI files, their relationship, it seems like it was pretty rocky, up and down all the time. The documents, they even suggest that she claimed to have a child with Chaplin. And to make it even more complicated, Chaplin had already settled a paternity suit with her before all this. But that didn't stop the FBI. They kept digging.
They kept investigating, even to the settlement. What were they hoping to find? I mean, what more could there be?
That's the thing. It's like they were looking for something else, something more, something to really pin on Chaplin, The paternity suit, it wasn't enough for them. They wanted to prove he violated the Mann Act. And a big part of that was proving he took Barry across state lines for, an immoral purpose.
So what exactly were they looking at? What kind of information were they trying to get their hands on?
Well, they were really trying to put together a timeline. When and where were Chaplin and Barry together? They even looked at hotel records to see where they stayed. One document, it mentions a trip they took to New York in 1942. The FBI, they were really interested in that trip, trying to find anything that showed, that something happened there, something wrong.
New York in 1942, wasn't that when the Red Scare was starting up? That whole fear of communism. Do you think the FBI was worried about something more than just the Mann Act?
Yeah, you're right. That was the time of McCarthyism. That fear of communists was everywhere. And Hollywood, with all its liberal types, they were seen as a potential hotbed for communist sympathizers.
Yeah.
And Chaplin, he was already on the FBI's radar because of his outspoken views. He was definitely a person of interest.
So they were suspicious of his politics, too, on top of everything else.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Any link to communist activities, even a small one, it would have been a huge deal back then. The FBI, they wanted to find something to discredit Chaplin, and this trip to New York, it gave them a chance to dig into his political life.
So what did they actually find out about this New York trip? Was there anything that confirmed their suspicions?
Well, the documents, they show that while he was in New York with Joan Barry, Chaplin spoke at a Russian war relief gathering. And back then, with all the tension and suspicion around anything Russian, that definitely raised some eyebrows. The FBI was all over it.
That doesn't look too good for Chaplin. But if this was such a big deal, why wasn't it all over the news? Did the FBI keep it quiet?
It wasn't completely secret. There were rumors in Hollywood, whispers here and there. But there's one name that keeps popping up in these documents, a guy named Edward Cheney. He was Chaplin's former butler. And it seems like he knew a lot about Chaplin's personal life. And he was more than happy to tell the FBI all about it.
Wait, Chaplin's butler was spilling the beans to the FBI? That's quite a betrayal.
It definitely adds a whole new layer to the story. The documents, they say that Cheney knew a lot about Chaplin and Barry's relationship. He even told the FBI that he had been going to see Barry at her mother's house and talking about her and Chaplin.
Wow, so he was giving them some serious insider info. How did Chaplin react to all this? Did he know his butler was talking to the FBI?
Well, from what we can see in the files, Chaplin was furious. The documents even say he was thinking about suing Cheney. He was even considering accusing Cheney of being mentally unstable. It was a messy situation, that's for sure.
This is getting more and more interesting. So we've got a love triangle, a suspicious trip to New York, and a disgruntled ex-employee spilling secrets. But this was just the beginning of the FBI's investigation. What else did they find?
We were talking about the FBI being worried about Chaplin's communist ties, right? Well, those fears, they really took off when they started looking at his money, his finances.
Oh, yeah. This is where it gets really interesting. So what were they hoping to find in his financial records? Like, I don't know, secret payments to the Communist Party?
Well, they were definitely looking for anything like that, anything that tied him to communist organizations. But they were also looking for anything, any irregularities, anything they could use against him. So they asked the Treasury Department for his income tax returns, hoping to find something, some evidence of wrongdoing.
So it sounds like they were just trying to find anything they could to use against him. Did they find anything incriminating in his finances?
Well, a lot of that part of the documents, it's redacted, so it's hard to say for sure. But there's this one detail that really stands out. The FBI interviewed Chaplin's old butler, Andrew Dahl, his name was, and they specifically asked him about this big purchase of coffee that Chaplin had made.
Coffee? Really? What's so suspicious about buying a lot of coffee?
Right. It seems strange. Maybe they thought it was some kind of code, or that he was hoarding it for some reason. Who knows? Maybe they were just clutching at straws, trying to find anything unusual. But it shows you how closely they were watching him. Every little thing.
Yeah, it is a bit creepy to think about the level of surveillance he was under. Speaking of unusual details, the FBI also seemed very interested in Chaplin's, his potential plans to leave the United States.
Right.
There's even a mention of him moving money to a Canadian bank.
Right. They were pretty sure that Chaplin was getting ready to skip town, maybe to avoid prosecution or to find a place that was more friendly to communists. They were watching his travel plans, checking his finances, basically trying to guess his next move.
So they were really trying to paint a picture of him as this communist sympathizer who was about to run away. Did their investigation actually turn up any evidence to support that idea?
Well, they definitely found things that looked suspicious, but there's no smoking gun in these documents, nothing that proves without a doubt that Chaplin was planning to flee, or that he was actively involved with communist activities, really. And it's important to remember, these are just the FBI files, They only give us one side of the story.
Yeah, that makes you wonder about the other side of the story, right? Like, what was Joan Barry's perspective on all of this? Did she ever talk about her relationship with Chaplin or what it was like to be in the middle of this whole thing?
That's a really good question. And honestly, her voice is kind of missing from these documents. We can only guess about her reasons and what she went through, based on what the FBI wrote. But she was at the center of it all. And her accusations, whether they were true or not, they had a huge impact on Chaplin's life.
It's a good reminder that history is often told from the point of view of the people in power. And it's easy to forget about the perspectives of those who weren't.
Absolutely. That's why it's important to think critically about historical documents, to consider the biases and the things that might be missing.
Okay, so back to Chaplin. We've talked about the Mann Act, his alleged communist ties, even his coffee buying habits. But there's another interesting aspect to this whole story. The media frenzy that surrounded it.
Oh, yeah. The media loved this story. I mean, Chaplin was a global superstar, and the allegations, they were sensational. Newspapers were full of headlines about the Chaplin scandal. People were completely captivated by all the drama unfolding in Hollywood.
It must have been a nightmare for Chaplin from a PR standpoint. How did he deal with all that negative attention? Did he try to defend himself publicly?
He did, yeah. But it wasn't easy. He was under a lot of pressure from the media, the public, even the government. You have to remember, this was during McCarthyism. Any hint of communist sympathies could ruin your career. People were saying Chaplin was un-American. Some even wanted him deported.
Wow. So he was stuck in this awful situation full of suspicion and fear. It's amazing he was able to handle all that scrutiny. Did he ever address the allegations directly?
Yeah, he did. He released statements denying any wrongdoing. He said he was innocent throughout the whole investigation. He even challenged the Mann Act itself, saying it was being used unfairly to target him for his political beliefs.
So he wasn't backing down, but did he have any support during all of this? Did anyone stand up for him?
Surprisingly, yeah. I mean, a lot of people were quick to judge him, but there were also people who could see that this wasn't right. Several big names in Hollywood, even some with conservative views, they spoke out against the FBI investigation, They said Chaplin was being targeted unfairly.
So it wasn't just a one-sided attack.
Yeah.
There were people who saw past all the hysteria, people who realized something wasn't right.
Exactly. It shows that even in times when everyone is afraid and suspicious, there are still people who are willing to stand up for what they believe in, even if it means going against what everyone else is saying.
But even with some support, Chaplin's reputation definitely suffered because of all this. What was the lasting impact of this investigation?
Well, that's a question we're going to dig into in the last part of our deep dive. We'll look at the consequences of this investigation for Chaplin and for the whole culture of Hollywood during this crazy time.
So, we've been talking about Chaplin and this idea that we might run away from the U.S. The FBI, they really thought that was a possibility. But did he ever actually leave?
Yeah, it's interesting, right, how that fear just kind of hung over the whole investigation. But to answer your question, no, Chaplin didn't leave the U.S. for good, not then. He stayed and fought the accusations. But yeah, it all had a huge impact on his life, his career.
So he stayed, but what happened? Did the FBI ever actually get enough to charge him with anything?
Well, despite all their digging, they never did charge him with anything related to the Mann Act. They looked at everything, his relationships, his finances, even his political views. But it wasn't enough. They couldn't make a solid case stick. But even though he wasn't found guilty of anything, officially, the investigation itself did a lot of damage.
So even though he wasn't convicted, it still hurt his reputation.
Oh, absolutely. The constant media attention, everyone watching him, the accusations of being a communist, it all took its toll. He became a controversial figure. His image, the one that used to be all about laughter and fun, well, it was now kind of clouded with suspicion.
That's just sad. This guy, this comedic genius who brought so much joy to people, and then suddenly he's being attacked and pushed away. It makes you think about how this whole thing affected his legacy.
Yeah, it's a good point. This investigation, it definitely changed how people remember Chaplin. It shows that even someone as famous and loved as him can be vulnerable to, fear and suspicion.
It also makes you think about what was happening in America back then. The Red Scare. It created this atmosphere where anyone with even slightly left-wing views could be targeted. It's a warning about what can happen when politics gets too extreme, and how important it is to protect individual freedoms, even when things are scary and uncertain.
Yeah, these documents, they're like a window into that time in American history, a really turbulent time. They show the power of ideology, how much influence the media has, and how fragile a person's reputation can be, even someone like Charlie Chaplin.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the takeaway? What should we be thinking about after all this?
I think this story asks us to look at things from different angles. We see the FBI's perspective through these documents, but there are other sides to this story that we don't get to see here. What was Joan Barry's experience? What were Chaplin's real intentions? These are good questions to think about as we look back at this event, an event that is both complex and full of contradictions.
It's also a reminder that history isn't just about dates and facts. It's about real people and their lives, and the choices they made in really difficult situations. This deep dive into Chaplin and the FBI, it's given us a look into a time of huge change and uncertainty, a time that in a lot of ways still speaks to us today.
And even though we've uncovered a lot, there's still more to discover. These documents, with all the parts that are blacked out, they leave us with some unanswered questions. They encourage us to keep digging, to look for other points of view, to keep trying to unravel the mysteries of the past.
This deep dive, it's been a journey into the dark side of Hollywood's golden age, a story of suspicion, secrets, and how powerful fear can be. We hope this has given you a new way to think about Charlie Chaplin, the FBI, and the forces that shaped American history. Thanks for joining us.
Artificial Frontier Podcast.